Hello. Okay, so let's try again. Um, yeah, so good evening, everybody. Again, thank you, Dr. Galvez, for inviting me to give this talk. I've been looking forward to it for a while. My name is Liliana Camison, and I'm a plastic and reconstructive surgery resident. I'm in my last year of training at the University of Pittsburgh. So technically I'm a PGY 6, but in reality I'm a PGY 10. And you will see why soon as we go through the talk. Disclosure, the first part of any talk. I have no financial conflicts of interest. And most importantly, this is only my personal story and opinion, and it does not reflect any particular institution's view or personalized advice. So as far as what we're going to discuss today. So first, I'll give you some stats on the plastics and reconstructive surgery match, then some general information on matching into plastic surgery. I'll tell you my personal story, some lessons I've learned along the way, and then we can move on to the Q&A. The first thing that I want you to take from this, if you take nothing else, is this, and it's that success really is not linear, and hopefully I'll prove that with my story. So the NRMP, the National Residency Match Program, publishes their stats yearly. So we can start with some of those stats for PRS for the last available March in 2022. Here's the number of positions that were offered in the match per specialty. And in 2022, there were 194 positions in 89 programs for plastic surgery, compared to, for example, over 9,000 in internal medicine or 1,600 in general surgery. So you can kind of get an idea of how different this field is. And here you see the matches by specialty per applicant type. So for plastic surgery, you can see there were 194 positions in 2022. All of them filled, out of which 4 were United States IMGs or US citizen IMGs, and 7 were non-US IMGs. But overall, the number of FMGs matched has actually risen over the years. These tables show the percentages of matched applicants per year across all specialties, with the numbers and percentages of positions filled by FMGs. And 11 overall for last year is not bad at all. That's compared to 8 for the year prior, 9 for the year before, 4 the year before, and the year when I matched in 2017, there were only 2. So it's hard, but it's definitely possible. Now, general things. So in terms of how to match into plastic surgery residency, there's 2 ways of getting in. The first is the classic and integrated pathway, where you do 6 or 7 years of plastic surgery residency as your first surgical residency out of medical school, and 6 or 7 depending on whether or not there's a year of research, because some residents mandate it still. And then there's the independent pathway, which is 3 years of plastic surgery fellowship, quote unquote, because it still really is a residency. If you compare it to fellowships, basically expect to be a resident after you complete a different full surgical residency. And that can be anywhere between 5 and 7 years, depending on the type that you did. So general surgery is still the most common one by far, but still some people go through otolaryngology. And very rarely, in theory, it's a possibility, but you could do it after urology, orthopedic surgery. Having said that, urologists and orthopedic surgeons make a lot more money than plastic surgeons. So not that that's the reason why you would care, but they're also competitive. And I imagine a lot of people, once they've gone through all that work, they don't see why they would change their specialty to decrease their salary. So perhaps that's the reason why we don't see it anymore as often. And in terms of some differences, the integrated pathway is really hard. And to be honest, having been here for the past 5 cycles of matches after mine, and seeing the applicants coming in, I think it's getting harder. And because every year, it's like educational inflation. Every year I see them getting stronger and better with more publications than some specialties would want for an associate professor position. So it's really hard. It's still one of the most competitive residencies in the US, if not the most, and CVs can be really impressive, like I was saying. But I will say that even though it sounds like 6 years is less than 5 plus 3, it's not necessarily shorter. And you'll see why. It's the reason simply is that we usually have to do quite a bit of additional activities to make ourselves competitive as IMGs. And if you're just thinking of time, it really might not end up saving you any time. And speaking of the integrated pathway, then I would say it's significantly easier. Now, easier on quotes, because of course it's a surgical residency, it's hard, and it's an amazing pathway. And some of our mentors and some of the most amazing plastic surgeons I know have gone through this. So it is by no means a lesser way to go through it. It's just what was the classic way before plastic surgery became an integrated one. And because it takes more time, let's say it's less favorable. However, the reality is that the applicant bar really is not as high if you compare it to the integrated pathway in terms of additional things that they have. So for example, when I see the roster for the applicants for the independent pathway, it's normal to see them having 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 research papers. Whereas the other day when we had our integrated residency interviews, I was looking at paper numbers in the 40s and 50s for fourth year medical students, which is really wild to me. So that's what I mean in terms of not as high. But again, these are full-fledged general surgeons that just have all this surgical knowledge to offer and to bring to our residency. And again, not necessarily longer. I think it's really a good option to consider, and it might be a more certain pathway. But again, here to talk about both, and I am an integrated one, so it is by no means impossible. If I'm here, that means you can do it too. General things, and I won't spend too much time talking about this because I think a lot of it can be found online, but you need your USMLE, and it's changing because now it's pass fail. So still, I guess step 2 is one that you can focus on to try and get a good score. You need an ACFMG certificate. It's annoying, but it's just paperwork. And so far, research time, I think, has been the norm for all of us IMGs in plastic surgery. And networking is very important, and mentors are really the key, but don't force it. I see how there's so much these days about find a mentor, and everybody feels like they need to find one, but I feel it's not the type, and this is again my personal opinion, but I think it's very hard if somebody just writes you, "Hi, I want you to be my mentor." And then, there might be 10 people that are asking you to do that, but you don't know them. You don't know anything special about them. You maybe have no particular reason why you want them to succeed, or they know very little about you. And maybe you're just part of, a list of 15 emails that they've sent. I would argue that the mentorship that's most effective, is the mentorships that are like a relationship that are kind of fostered over time. So of course you need people who give you advice and to guide you in the right direction, but I wouldn't call those necessarily mentors, in the strict sense of the word. So we can talk a little bit more about that too as we move on. And bottom line, as an IMG, it's a long and a complicated process. Know that the road's going to be long and hard, but if this really is what you want, it can be done and it will be worth it. And each person will find their own way. So now I will tell you mine. So first, how I got here. And I hope that my story can serve you perhaps to find some inspiration and see that it is possible, and maybe a good idea or two that could help you on your own path. And a special shout out to my parents, without whom none of this would have ever even been possible. And I will say that they're still to this day bending over backwards so that I can continue to achieve my dreams. But that's a different story. But they're still helping me so that I can make fellowship happen and all these different things. So a little bit of general things. So again, my full name, you overheard it, Liliana Camison. I was born in Vienna, actually, but I am for all purposes Colombian. We moved to Spain when I was 4, then we moved to Cali, one of the cities in Colombia, the third biggest one when I was 5, and then we moved to Medellin when I was 10, and that's where I ended up growing up and going to medical school. The reason for all those moves were my parents' positions. My dad is an orchestra conductor and a viola player, and he was a university professor. Or is a university professor, and my mom was a musicologist and also worked as a university professor and later as a teacher of Spanish and German. And I went to medical school at Universidad CES, Escuela de Medicina, again, that's in Medellin, and I started in January 2007 when I was 17, as is usually in Colombia. It's not that I was a prodigy or anything. So I had always wanted to be a surgeon. Many factors had played a part. I was obsessed with medicine and science when I was growing up. And that was just kind of its own thing. I didn't pick it up from anywhere, but it's what I was good at and what I enjoyed watching on TV. And with my parents' careers and the exposure to music and art that I had growing up, I saw in plastic surgery that it really could be the marriage between the art that I loved and the science that I was so interested in. And a month before starting medical school, I met someone who became very special to me. His name was Rodrigo, and he had been born with microtia, or the congenital lack of an ear. But when I met him, his ear looked completely normal to me. His ear had been reconstructed by no less than Dr. Bert Brent, who, if you have been around plastic surgery for a while, you'll definitely know his name. He's considered to be the father of ear reconstruction in the United States, if not the world. And thanks to Rodrigo, I was able to travel to California after a lot of saving as a junior medical student to see him perform this masterful surgery where he carved ears out of children's ribs with the most beautiful results. I felt so inspired while I was there on that 2-week trip that I went to the hotel and I made him a sculpture, like an ear out of clay. I gave it to him, and after that, we just clicked. This incredible connection was born, and he really became my first mentor. Now, he did not have a way to help me to get into residency. He was in private practice in the middle of a tiny town in California. Dr. Galvez, I'm sure, knows all about it. And he had left academics decades prior, but he was the first person to tell me, you have what it takes and you can do this. And the plastic surgery that I wanted to do was like the plastic surgery that he did, was complex facial reconstruction, cranial surgery, pediatric plastic surgery. And I knew that if I wanted to train where academic plastic surgery was, and where the Mecca was, and where these complex problems were a daily thing, I had to come to the US. So I started that journey. I know it was going to be hard, but I started it. However, I really had no idea how to get there. So I went to New York City on my first time there, and in an act of courage, quote unquote, because today I would makes me cringe and I just call it being naive, but that's how life works. I wrote emails to every single program director of plastic surgery in New York City, telling them that I had always wanted to be a plastic surgeon in the United States and that I wanted to speak to them about any recommendation they could have. And to my surprise, one of them actually responded. So I arrived to his office that morning and I said, okay, I want to do plastic surgery in the US. I know how the general process works with the exams, but what should I do to match plastic surgery specifically? And he thought for a second and he said, I admire your courage, but you're facing a big wall. What you want to do is nearly impossible. And as you already know, because I just told you, this is what he meant. Plastic surgery back then, these are the stats from 2017, was the most competitive specialty at the time, and foreigners were very rarely matched. There had only been one person from my country who had done the integrated pathway, and she had left after intern year. So I didn't have anybody even from my background that I could get a lot of guidance on. But nearly impossible means not impossible, right? So I said, okay, I have to give it a try. And I was determined. The day I sat in his office, all I had was the will and the determination to do this. I had absolutely nothing else that said I was going to be successful in this pursuit. So I want you to remember that we all start from scratch, but from scratch I started making my way. There were too many obstacles, though. They told me it was impossible, but I knew I had a strong will to get there. I had a circle of people around me who believed in me, and I was determined to make it happen and find a way. I had no idea how I would afford it. And please know, I do not come from a wealthy family. My medical degree was financed with a loan, which back home is not as normal as it is here because it's significantly more affordable. But I still worked and I saved. And the reality is I found some people along the way that were just truly angels and helped me pay for things too. And I didn't know anybody who could help me directly. My parents were not physicians and I knew nobody here. But again, you make your contacts. I needed a mentor and I had Dr. Brent, but I needed somebody who could actually help me and guide me on how to get there and give me the roadmap. He had sort of given me the belief that I could get to the finish line maybe, but I had no roadmap to get started. And most importantly, I had to find a way to compete against the best students from the best universities of the United States, me being from a small university in Colombia that nobody here in the US knew. So I had to give a program director, like the one I met in New York City, and that's exactly what he told me, a reason to pick me, a risk and an unknown commodity, perhaps instead of picking someone from the US from a school that they know with a big name. So I figured that the key was to be outstanding in something. I had to make myself a good candidate by finding something that could be a differentiating factor. And in my case, it would be research. So I knew I needed to find a paid research position once I finished. And I started doing the basic stuff. So I did some rotations and a wave. And the first one that I could do was at the University of Miami. It was only an observership, and the department was not what was considered at the time one of the hyper academic institutions, but it was a start, and I decided I would make the very best of it. So over 3 months, even though I was not even accepted to rotate in plastic surgery, I became friends with the sub-I on the service, who, by the way, ended up training at the top institutions in plastic surgery and was one of the first people to write me a letter of recommendation. And I became friends with the resident. They told the chief of the department enough about me until he was sick, and he allowed me to participate in research. And over those 3 months, I managed to get my first 3 publications out. I was staying in the library with that sub-I until 2 in the morning, but it worked. And I made a lot of contacts and advice. And while I was there, I was already thinking about the next step. And I knew I wanted a hands-on rotation to get better letters of recommendation, but there were very few that allowed this for IMGs. And they were ridiculously expensive. Back in the day, I remember between $2,000 and $4,000 a month. And, they were like, oh, you need 3 months. So I chose Mount Sinai, honestly, because it was the least expensive. And I started the process over a year in advance to leave towards the end of 2012 when I was meant to graduate. And by this time, I was working as an official translator for an official translator for legal documents, and doing other things. So I was meant to go there at the end of my medical school. So that would have been in 2012, and everything was set up. But after a year of preparation and a week before I left, unfortunately, I was in a bad car accident and I had to cancel absolutely everything. I was stuck to a wheelchair for 2 months, and I could have given up at that point because it seemed like it was just not meant to be. But I found a way around it. I asked the school to let me graduate 6 months later so that I could still appear as a medical student and try to reschedule my rotation at Sinai. The kind Mount Sinai clerk, even though it said everywhere that it wouldn't be rescheduled, she allowed me to move the rotation due to the calamity. But this time, as you can see there, they did not have plastic surgery, which I obviously needed for my purpose. But I accepted it. And then I found out that the program director of Mount Sinai Plastic Surgery was going to be the invited speaker that fall at an ASMS basic science course, basic craniofacial course. And I was still recovering, but I gathered $1,000. I bought a plane ticket to Miami. I subscribed to the course, and I literally chased Dr. Taub. He remembers this, down a parking lot to beg him to let me rotate with them for the next spring. And although up until that time, he had never responded to a single of my emails, he laughed and he accepted. So on my second try, I finally made it to New York City in 2013. And of note, I had also all this time been emailing people in research in plastic surgery for 2 years, but nothing had panned out. I was the one who was also sending 50 emails out and getting few responses, and the few I got were negative. So part of my plan of going to Mount Sinai was to try and get a research opportunity in person. And plastic surgery did not have anything at the time, but I had been speaking to somebody in ENT for a long time over email. And after a lot of meetings, I got it. I got my paid research fellowship, and that was my way to get in. But it was ENT, and I was very excited, but it was genetics and immunology. I knew very little about either. I had no special background in either. And I was, of course, going to take it, but something about it just felt off. I worried that it wasn't the right path to get me to plastic surgery. So my doubts were growing, and I really felt at times that the path was leading me astray. As I remember this, because I had written it somewhere, and I'm glad I found it. So during my search, somebody at Sloan Kettering told me, listen, nobody's going to pick a Colombian student for plastic surgery residency. It's impossible, not even for general surgery in a community program. Try another specialty. My last day at Mount Sinai, I was leaving. I had just thanked somebody in the department, and I realized I had forgotten to say thank you to the secretary. So I went back, and before they saw me, I overheard them saying, that stubborn girl, one day she will turn 65, look back and regret all the time she lost trying to accomplish something that wasn't possible. And one of my surgical mentors back home told me, go and try, you will not match, but if you don't try, you will be full of regret. When you fail, you will be able to return and change gears and be okay about it. But like Roundy Pausch said, I don't know if you've seen this talk, the last lecture, it's a video on YouTube, you have to watch it, it's amazing. The brick walls are there for a reason. The brick walls are not there to keep us out. The brick walls are there to give us a chance to show how badly we want something, because the brick walls are there to stop people who don't want it badly enough. They're there to stop the other people. And really, I found that when you work really hard, opportunities just have a way of finding you. And a couple of weeks before signing that ENT contract for research that I had found at Mount Sinai, somebody randomly contacted me on Skype and told me about a research position that had been posted at the Student Doctor Network at Pitt. She told me, you're never going to get it, but it's good practice for interviews, so just give it a try. I applied, I got an interview. I was at Kentucky at the time doing another observership that for 2 weeks that I had managed to set up while trying to meet people at that ASMS meeting in Miami. And they gave me a phone interview for Pitt, but I was so committed to making this work that I said, you know what, I'll show up in person. But when I saw that the plane tickets for the next day were impossible to afford, I rented a car. I drove for 10 hours all night to make it. And when I sat down with Dr. Losi, super excited, he told me about the position, but then he said, oh, it's actually an unpaid position and you're going to have to work for free. And trust me, I would have never had it in me to negotiate, and I still don't. But I just told him the truth. I had been driving all night and I had all my hopes in this. And I told him I can't afford that. I thanked him profusely for the opportunity, but I said, I'm going to have to take my ENT position in New York City, and hopefully I'll see you in a few years when I try to make my way back around to the specialty. And he was actually so surprised that I already had another offer that he said, give me a few days to see what I can do. And a couple of days later, he got me an offer letter with a salary. So I signed the contract and moved to Pittsburgh. And I arrived in Pittsburgh in August of 2013, and I spent 4 years doing research. And I know it seems like a long time, but it really flew by. It was one of the most amazing stages in my life, and I took it very seriously. It was my chance to stand out. I was the AV expert for Grand Rounds, who arrived early to set up the computer and every resident and every visiting professor talk. I arranged dinners for Journal Club. I ran errands for people in the department and gladly babysat their children. But roadblocks never stopped. I had been working on an AFIRM grant for 3 years when the radiology department basically lost all of our experimental CT scans during a computer snafu. And it was so bad that they actually reimbursed the department for $300,000. But of course, nobody was going to give me my 3 years back. So all of my work in basic science had been lost. But thanks to my clinical research, it didn't matter much in the end. I was able to present my work in conferences around the country and the world over 40 times. I got to go to mission trips to Vietnam and Guatemala and meet other amazing surgeons who also became loving mentors. But most importantly, over time, with that hardworking attitude, the perfectionism, which sometimes can be bad, but sometimes it's helpful, and the consistency of all those little tasks, I got a good reputation with the department. People knew I worked very hard and they knew they could trust me. So I became a part of the Pitt Plastic Surgery family. And I would like to say that I earned a mentor. Over time, Dr. Losi became not only my clinical mentor, but truly like a second father. And over that last year of research, just so you know a little bit of the logistics, I took a 50% pay cut to work part-time, and I took the USMLE. And honestly, it didn't go as amazing as I hoped. Truth is, I did not ace it at all. I managed to get a very average score, but I did better on step 2. And I still got 8 interviews. And the interesting thing to me is that every single one of those was from somewhere where they knew me personally. There was some sort of connection. There was not a single interview that was from somebody opening this IMG's CV and being like, oh, she's interesting. But it was all just from contacts and people who knew how hard I worked and kind of my work ethic. And well, you know how the story ends, because in 2017, I matched and I chose to stay at Pitt. And Pittsburgh has been my last home for the past 10 years. I could make an entire separate talk about residency and everything that has entailed, but we will leave that for another time. But here's where I met my husband and fell in love. I have made amazing memories, incredible friends, and my kid was born here 6 months ago, and he's now a proud Pittsburgher too. So I urge you to find your own way of standing out. Find what everybody does and try to do things a little bit differently, actually. Look for opportunities because they will never fall on your lap. Always say yes. And the secret to success is hard work. Have a goal and chase it with passion and perseverance. And one thing that I think about very seriously is that you're never not being watched. If you want to be a plastic surgeon, Dr. Lucy says you have to play the part. And what I mean by that is professionalism. People are always watching you, how you talk, how you write, how you are in social settings, your attention to detail, whether you dress appropriately for different things. And all those seemingly little things really matter. And most importantly, just make sure to enjoy the ride. I really love this poem by Robert Frost that says, "Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference." So I really urge you guys to just do something different, make yourself stand out, and because you know what, it really was not impossible. And with that, I'll take some questions.
Hello, it seems like Juan has a question if he wants to ask it.
I was hoping to ask a few questions before we go into questions from from Juan. Juan, can you give me a few minutes? Is that okay?
Okay.
Just 1 second. So thank you so much, Dr. Camison. I'm a fan of everything from the first time that I learned about your story. And so thank you so much for giving this talk today. And it is incredibly inspiring. And I love the emails because I do that too. I have emails that I have saved, cut and pasted, saved. I have them in folders. I have them from positive things and negative things too, because the negative things you also remember, right? And you also pivot from that, or you don't listen, or you decide something different. And like you said, it's the road less traveled. And so it's just these opportunities that you made, right? That is what your story is, right? And it's what those opportunities that you made by advocating for yourself, by being assertive, right? Spending time with Bert Brent, right? Getting that initial interest, 2 years of sending emails, 4 years of persistence in the lab, right? All those pivot points you decided, and those are opportunities that you made yourself, which is incredible. And I definitely agree with you as far as mentors, that it shouldn't be forced, and it develops over time, and it is a relationship. And I appreciate the aspects of your story. I know everyone appreciates the aspect of your story of just the frankness of it, right? That you don't come from a physician, a family of physicians, right? And it's assumed. It sometimes is assumed, and it is a little bit common sometimes. Even for me, my grandfather was a pediatric surgeon in Peru, so I already had a hint of what a doctor was like, even though it wasn't here. But sometimes that story with the IMG, there is an assumption that maybe your family comes from physicians. And then that socioeconomic part, I think, is so important, is speaking that truth of how was it? You told Dr. Losi no, right? That's insane. And it's not insane because not insane because you made the reasonable choice for yourself, right? And this is still a common thing that happens all the time, where even for me, I have students where I don't have separate research funding. I can't offer research funding. And it's you want to offer an opportunity, but you want to make sure that you're compensating that person. But when they have to live here with the changes right now with inflation and cost of living, it really makes a big difference. And talking about it is making a change. And like ACAPS, multiple societies, they talk about, hey, if we're going to provide a research opportunity, it needs to come with compensation in some way or form. And so that's, and there's a lot of things I can talk about from each different aspect of your slide, but I'm I am very
Thank you.
excited to see what you do, right? And it's
Thank
coming
you so
fast.
much.
It's coming
Yeah.
fast. That's what's so incredible is you've
It
been
flies
working.
by.
And watch your baby too, because your baby 6 months is a
Oh my
beautiful
gosh.
age. Enjoy your baby,
Yeah.
but it comes fast, and you're interviewing for a job comes fast and starting, and that is the goal. The goal is your ability to take care of patients is going to be better than a lot of other plastic surgery residents or attendings. And it's no offense to them, but this connection, the cultural part, it does make a difference. And you're going to see it when you open up your clinic and you're meeting these families, and you talk to these families, and you're talking to a mother who has a newborn child, and you're able to say, I'm a mother too. I can't imagine your
Yeah.
ability to empathize and to connect with the families. I'm excited to see where your practice ends up. So that's it. That's me being a
Thank
super.
you so much. No, Dr. Galvez, I'll say that that means the world. I've also followed your career, from the time I met you at Stanford when I was lucky enough to be interviewed. And it's, to see the process through fellowship and being an admirer of your art and your illustrations and where you are now and how you built this practice out of a smaller children's hospital in California, and recently seeing you give a talk here in our department. So thank you again so much for having me. We do have to stick together and kind of inspire each other at different stages along the way. So with that, I hope that I can be of service to you guys, and let me know how I can answer any questions.
Yes, go ahead. Answer your question, Juan. Sorry to hold you up from your run. It looks like you're on a run right now.
Hello, Dr. Liliana. First of all, I really want to thank you because I felt every single word of your story. I'm from Colombia. I'm from Cali too. I went to med school in Universidad Caldas. I know that you know where it is. I am in Miami right now. I am basically following your steps, and I am so happy that I was able to connect because it's like I have a motivation, and I have heard the same phrases, people saying you should return to Colombia, you're never gonna make it, but this today is like, it's really, I'm gonna make it, and seeing you there is like, wow, it is possible. It's not like the other people say, so really thank you. And my question to you is, right now that it's been hard after COVID to do interviews for research fellowships in person, what do you recommend for us to do our application different from the others?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think COVID really has made things harder for you guys, but I don't know if I have necessarily the solution, but I hope that from the story you realize that all of these roadblocks, they're always there for everybody. And what you have is find a way to make them either work on you, to your advantage, or now with the loosening COVID rules, maybe is like going to a place where you can be like, hi, I'm actually in town for vacation. Not true. And over those days, would it be possible to meet in person? I mean, again, sometimes I broke some rules along the way, right? Like the woman at Mount Sinai wasn't happy with me when she realized that I had like the clerk who organized the rotations. She was very unhappy when she found out that I had traded one of my official rotations for the unofficial that I got in a parking lot in Miami, right? With Dr. Tao, but it was necessary and it changed everything for me. So what I'm trying to say is sometimes just you have to think outside the box a little bit. So just find ways to be like, okay, this is in front of me and it looks like it's going to make things harder. How can I make the most of it? And the traveling thing is just an example, because I know it's expensive and it might not be practical, and sometimes it's just the rules of the hospital, but there's always a way. And sometimes it's also, out of 50 places that you try, like it was for me, sometimes it's the last one on the list that you haven't looked at. So you just have to kind of carve your own way and make it work.
Thank you.
But thank you for all the praise. I appreciate it, and I'm happy it was helpful. Anybody else?
We have a couple questions on the chat. I don't know if you want to read them or do you want me to read them for you?
Oh yeah, if you want to read them, that'd be great. That way I can keep my glasses off.
Okay. So, let me start. So Diana asked, hi, I'm totally inspired. I would like to know, what do you think about an IMG with more than 5 years of graduation and no research experience? Is there any chance?
It's definitely harder. I'm not gonna lie. I think the farther you get along from medical school, there's always going to be the question of what you were doing during that time. So if you have a good reason and it's something where you can make, like, it's a personal story that makes sense, or you were pursuing some other educational thing, or maybe it was a road that failed, and that can be your own story. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, obviously they call it here a red flag. Like, I do think that for IMGs is different than for US medical students, because usually their paths are just kind of set up where they can keep going and rolling. So then when somebody stops and takes a break, everybody kind of wonders why. So I do think it's different for us. 5 years is a little bit, it's kind of a long time. But again, if you have an explanation for it, let's say if you were like, there's people who's been, in the military that I've heard that spend that time there, or where, I was working in the mountains in my country providing, care in this particular facility, or I was doing this other residency, but now I want to change gears, or I was a nurse and, then I became a doctor. And like, I will also say that plastic surgery, fortunately, is a specialty that I think values people with different backgrounds, different abilities. It's one of the things that makes us great. So if you can make out of that gap an interesting story and a reason why that's going to make you better, then I think it can be done. I will say that without research these days is definitely that could be problematic, but that's why the other pathway for general surgery is also still there. Does it take a long time? Yes, but residencies in the US are paid. In the end, it's a job. It'll make you an amazing surgeon with extra training. So if you really want it, I think that's another way to do it.
Thank you. And then Hazim asked, thank you so much, Dr. Camison. Since away rotations represent a significant stepping stone for building connections at different institutions, how many monthly rotations would you advise we do, given the increase of competitiveness of the integrated match?
I think that has changed a lot. With COVID, even for US medical students, I think, there were a couple of years or a year where they weren't doing any, and it was kind of strange. And recently, they've been allowed to go to other places, and now it's back to 2 and 3 for US students. I don't think necessarily for us there's a number. I just think it's a good way for them to, for you to get to see the system, because there's also people who come and see the system and they say that's not for me, or just to get comfortable, honestly, with the daily workings of the hospital, the way the teams work here and the plastic surgery services run, and yes, to meet people. But if it's prohibited for financial reasons or something like that, I would say there's other ways of meeting people. Meetings are key. A lot of the people I met were also during plastic surgery meetings, conferences, coming up and talking to people with honest interest about their research, or having another mentor introduce you. So I would say you can gauge it yourself. I know people who have only done one away for maybe a couple of months, and that has been sufficient. But in my case, I did 2, and each of them played a very important part, because the one in Miami, yes, it was just an observership, but if I hadn't been there for 3 months, I don't think I would have had the opportunities to publish and to meet the people I did. And the one on Mount Sinai, being hands-on, had the benefit of providing me with a letter that could speak of like surgical abilities, not because you're supposed to have any as a medical student, but because it allows them to see you in that kind of even playing field with their own med students, where it doesn't sound like you're at a disadvantage, or there's an obvious question about this student, like, oh, but what if they don't know how to scrub in the operating room? But another thing that I did that I will tell you guys was, like, I didn't do it because anybody had done it. It just sounded like a great idea for me. And as I went on mission trips with US, plastic surgeons, because I knew that in other countries I could scrub in with them. And that's what got me two of my strongest letters of recommendation. So one of them was from, actually from a Stanford plastic surgeon that I adore, and I went with him to Vietnam, and I wouldn't have been able to scrub in at Stanford, but I was able to scrub in with him in Vietnam. And then the letter that he wrote me had the same, items that one from a US medical student would have had. So that's what I mean with thinking outside the box. I don't know how many months, but however many you feel it's gonna make you, make people be able to vouch for you.
Thank you so much for that answer. And then Alejandra, she asked, I would like to ask you, wait, it moved. I would like to ask you some tips on how to make the most of your research year. For example, publication number and quality.
Well, first thing I will say is that I think calling it a research year is probably years is more accurate. I think the person I know who has done the least has done maybe 2, and they were from the UK. But I think getting enough volume in the first year is, I hate to be the person who says nearly impossible, but I would say for all standards, nearly impossible, simply because it takes you so long to get all your clearances in order, kind of figure out how the system works. There's so much administration in between. The administrators take forever to do anything. So an animal protocol will take months to review and things like that. That I would say 2 years can probably get you a very good number of publications, because during the first year, you're figuring everything out. You're kind of planning all those seats of research. Because the other thing is that sometimes out of 15 projects that you get started on, 3 of them work. So if you only have a year, chances are, you started 15 and only 3 worked. It's the end of the year, you only have 3 publications. Now, in some places, you can still be a research machine, with just 1 year, but I would probably count on just 2. And in terms of number, it's hard. Like I was telling you guys, looking at the roster for each year for these plastic surgery applicants for the integrated pathway, it's wild. Some of them really have publications in the 40s and the 50s. I had 14 when I applied, just to give you an idea of how much things have changed. So maybe, the answer isn't just research. That's why I told you, for me at that time, when nobody from my country had done it, that was the answer. But nowadays, maybe it's getting an MBA in healthcare administration because you love it, or in public health. And Harvard, for example, has all these incredible fellowships that are paid for years. One of them is in global surgery that I, by the way, would have loved to do, but married and with a kid and in residency, I was like, okay, that's a dream for a different life. So sometimes there's these other opportunities that might not necessarily be research. And if you have 10 papers, but if you have an MBA, then it's all kind of part of this group of things that make you a strong applicant. So I don't want to give you a number, just try to make you yourselves really stand out. And look at what opportunities are out there that are beyond research, because I think that might be the key these days too. Now everybody's doing a ton of research and publishing a lot of papers. So look for different options too.
Thank you for that answer. So then Nicole, she asked 2 questions. One of them says, I'm currently a research fellow, unpaid, and I have some abstracts that are accepted at national meetings. Do you have any advice on how to get funding for conferences?
That is a tough one. Well, simply because I would say I was very fortunate in that my Dr. Losi here and Dr. Wolstein, here in my research position, they paid for all of that with their, kind of department money. But if you're not associated with a lab, and if none of your mentors can help, sometimes there's industry funding, there's industry grants. If there's something, let's say if you're working on breast reconstruction and there's a cellular dermal matrix in your research, then you might be, sometimes Allergan, for example, or Sientra or something are going to have grants for you to attend conferences. Conferences themselves usually have also scholarships for students to attend. And I think if you have an abstract admitted there and you write to them and you ask, do you have any scholarships? I really want to go, I want to present my work, but I don't have funding. Somebody might, answer, but yeah, obviously always ask your mentors first, because ultimately whomever is the senior author on that paper has an interest in that their research getting to be known. So sometimes they can pull funds from somewhere in their department or their hospital or something like that. But that's a few options that could work.
Thank you. And her second question is, how do you find out what plastic surgery programs are IMG friendly?
That's another thing that I would caution you against, and it's the IMG friendly term, because for example, when I did it, if your metric for IMG friendly has IMGs, then it would have been very few, like 3, right? So if you're trying to make yourself a new path, just kind of, sometimes you just have to knock on doors. Now, let's be objective. Yes, there's places that do have a history of having looked at the unusual applicants or who have had an IMG. So that's a great place to start. Just look, usually in web pages, there's recent graduates or where graduates are, and you can kind of stalk them and see where they come from. And see, obviously, for sure, if a program has had an IMG, then your chances are higher. But definitely do not rule out those who haven't had it, because I'll give you a very simple fact. You will see that the ones who have had IMGs are ironically some of the bigger programs. So when I applied, I remember that Harvard had Lisa Ferrer, who now is doing incredibly, and she had just matched into plastic surgery. She was from Austria. So huge program, right? Pitt, I knew that they had also taken FMGs, and they're also a huge program. But some of the smaller programs, sometimes they don't take IMGs because they don't have research fellowships and they just haven't met any, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't be willing to. So maybe see, is there a diverse faculty where maybe there's somebody who looks like you or is from your country or would appreciate the diversity kind of factor, or just reach out to them at meetings and you can kind of sense things. So I would say that's a way to start, and you can always just send emails, but do not think that just because there hasn't been, like, the vast majority of places in the US haven't had an IMG resident, right? It's so few of us. But yeah, maybe start your own IMG island in a new program. But yeah, through their websites, you can tell where their graduates have come from.
Thank you so much for that answer. So Aditya, she asks, thank you, Dr. Camison, for the amazing talk. It was really inspiring to see your journey. Could you please share some more advice on how to start research in undergrad?
Well, being completely honest, I had zero research as an undergrad because my university just wasn't big on research. I mean, we had an epidemiology class, and in theory, we had a research theory class, but there wasn't really much going on. So what I did was during my aways, and I think that's always an option, because sometimes there's clinical projects that you can really get done, over a weekend of working really hard. Now, I have a problem with people who say that they can do projects over a weekend because it takes me forever. But I think at that stage where you're on a time crunch, you're on a timeline, and you have a very limited time to do it, if you're in an away rotation and it's a month, and you tell them, is there something that you have pending, like a case, small case series, a case report, a letter to the editor, something I could help you with, or a project that is already going on that the residents have had sitting there forever because nobody has time to revise the manuscript. You can always find people who want help, and hey, maybe that'll get you, a 5th authorship, but that's a place to start. And now they know you, and now they know you're reliable, and they'll be like, oh, do you remember we gave him that paper we had been sitting on for 5 years, and he had it beautifully done within a week. And so, it's always just finding opportunities like that. I would say if your own institution doesn't have any, during your aways is a good time. Just make sure that whatever you commit to, you can finish, because at that particular point of your life, it really matters, of course.
Thank you. I think we have time for just a couple more questions to respect people's time and end at 8. So the next question comes from Anna. She asks, hello, what do you think have been the new challenges, your challenges as a new mom and a plastic surgeon? What does your day-to-day look like?
Oh, well, that's a whole other topic, but it wasn't easy. It was incredibly hard. I would say this year in this particular program, in my particular situation, is not a harder year, but being pregnant during fourth year and fifth year was very, very, very challenging. Being on call when I was 38 weeks pregnant, doing like 14-hour cases, and then going again to the hospital in the middle of the night to check a free flap, and it's not easy, but I think the field is also changing. People are becoming very just normalizing the idea of how women can just put their lives on hold until they're 35 and 36 and graduate from residency because biology is a thing. So I would say that, here in this program, there were three integrated residents my year. The three of us are females. The three of us were pregnant at the same time. The three of us now have young kids, and they made it work, with call, with everything else, and it was just fine. So is it easy? Absolutely not. But I think anybody who's a parent will tell you there's never a perfect time. So you just kind of do it whenever it makes sense to you and your family, and you weigh the pros and cons, and just I would say trying to find a program there where people are supportive and they have good family values, and that's a good question always to ask the residents, I think, and you can get a sense of that. But yeah, feel free to email me and contact me separately, and we can set up a totally different talk to talk about that, because that's its own conversation too.
Thank you so much for that answer. That's really inspiring. So Keisha asks, hi, Dr. Camison. Thank you so much for your talk. I'm truly inspired by your work. What would you say was the most rewarding part of your research years?
Oh my gosh, everything. I adore that time. And that's another thing that I want you guys to take from this is I remember when I was in medical school and I was thinking about this pathway, I honestly was one of those who said, oh, I'm going to need to do 1 year of research. And then I was like, okay, fine, I'll do 2. So if somebody had told me 12 years ago that I was going to do 4 years of research, I would have been like, okay, stop it. I'm not going to do that. That's crazy. But it went by so fast. And not just that, but what I told you about how, it's not just about the end of the road, because the end takes forever. And even when you reach it, there's another end, right? Like I'm about to graduate in 4 months, but I already have all these other goals that I'm chasing again. So just make sure you enjoy the ride. And those 4 years of research were so rich for me in every aspect. I got to travel, like I said, the world. I went to see, countries that I had never seen, and I probably would have had a really hard time affording to see otherwise. And I got to meet all these different people. I learned so much about research that I hadn't learned in medical school, and problem solving abilities. I learned how to make presentations, and because I knew how to work with PowerPoint and how to give a presentation, but delivery and like all those things to me were a totally different aspect that just really enriched my professional life. And from a personal standpoint, some of my my biggest friendships, the people who are like my sisters that are now around the world, I met during those years. So it can be a really amazing time. So just don't forget to enjoy whatever it is that time you're going to spend in trying to make sure that you get to this endpoint that plastic surgery might be. That time is really special. So just don't take it as this is going to be just like an annoyance in the road in the path, because it were some of the best years of my life. I can't pick a single aspect because all of them were great. It was hard. It was very hard because I was learning all these things and I was like, nobody taught me this, but it was so much fun.
Thank you. Yeah, I think those are all the questions we have on the chat. If anyone has any very quick questions.
We anticipated a lot of questions. There was just through social media, there was even questions through there. So there's always, and thank you so much for your presentation. It's just, this is always the, even from, because, training here in the US, like there are, I would say, particularly with Latino students, but actually from across the world, there are many IMGs that have a lot of questions. And like you said, everyone has a different journey. And so I always advise them to not only have questions that I can answer in regarding general applications to plastic surgery, but there is an additional hurdle. It is harder, right? It is there are additional challenges, and listening to your story, and asking these questions and how to get here, it's really, really important that they hear this. So thank you so much for sharing it.
No, of course, my pleasure. And the last thing I'll say, is like being totally honest, it's hard. It's all of it is really hard. Getting there was really complicated. There were so much. My mom's on the line because I told her to be here, and she will remember. And my parents remember. They're like, "You remember every single time that you were crying and telling us you weren't going to be able to do it, and then you did it anyway." I was like, "Yes, I remember." And it still happens in residency, where every couple of weeks I come home, not a couple of weeks, but I'm like, I can't do this. Like, how am I going to do this? This is so complicated. Or I made a mistake today. I don't like to make mistakes. There's all these. It's a learning process, and I don't think it ever ends. Just the challenges change, but I would just say be prepared for that. It's not going to be easy, and if you really want it enough, and if you are really passionate about it enough for the right reasons, and if you can't see yourself doing anything else, it's worth it, and it's a beautiful journey, and just make it your own. And don't forget that there's another option. The option of general surgery, it truly is a wonderful possibility. The option of becoming an amazing general surgeon, mastering your thing, proving everybody, even if it's in a small general surgery community program, just then be the best resident there. Be the one that everybody's like, oh, we took this guy as a prelim, but they were so excellent, but then they got a categorical, and then they took a research year off, and now I'm recommending them. And guess what? Then by the time you're done with your general surgery training, then maybe you're going to be the top applicant in that pool of independent applicants, and then you can pick to go wherever you want, to the top 3 programs that maybe you wouldn't have been able to access through the integrated pathway. So just don't become so fixated in time, because like I said, it's not necessarily going to be shorter. Sometimes there's people who keep trying years and years and years of research, and maybe one of your pathways is going to be like, you know what, I know I have this and this and this against me, or I have this reason why I would like to try through general surgery, and you make it work. And before you know it, like me, it's been 10 years and you're done. So just don't forget that as part of an alternative pathway that can also make you into what you want, if it works out for you that way.
We have one, thank you so much. We have one more question asking about visas. So would it be all right to ask one final question regarding visas?
Yeah.
Does the J1 allow, and this is where for me, like my eyes cross, because I don't know.
Yeah.
Does the J1 allow for both general surgery and plastic surgery, given that J1 has a maximum of 6 years?
You know what? That is a very good question. I, unfortunately, like in all transparency, I don't know the answer for that, but it was one of the reasons why I picked Pitt, because it was one of the minor reasons, because I loved it here and my husband was here and all of that. But it was one of the few places that was willing to give me an H1. And right before I started residency was when that freeze on H1s came up. And then, it happened to coincide with the time where I ended up getting married, and, we just accelerated the process, and we were like, you know what, we have to make it work. And so that was my visa pathway. I had a ton of F visas for rotations. Then throughout my research years, I was on a J1 without the requirement for the waiver, the requirement to go home. But I also have a lot of friends who have done it through J's, and I think there's ways to make it work. What I would recommend is just make an appointment with an immigration lawyer. I have talked to my fair share of immigration lawyers throughout this, because it's complicated, but there's always a loophole. Even for your waiver, you can work for the VA, you can work in an underserved community, and sometimes underserved communities are literally, like your garden. I think we were laughing the other day, because it seems like one of these major UPMC hospitals where we're sitting, it's considered an underserved area for some random reason. It's in the middle of the city. So I'm sure there's a loophole somewhere, and you can find it, because you wouldn't be the first one. I do know that here at Pitt, I knew a general surgeon from Kazakhstan who was on a J, and he actually ended up, he then did plastic surgery, and then he ended up in Oregon in a teeny tiny little town with like, I don't know how many people, I don't want to make it up, but tiny, doing plastic surgery there for 2 years. And now I don't know where he is because he fulfilled his waiver and left. And now I think he has a green card. So there is a way. It might give you, you know, a bit like an extra headache or an extra complicating factor, but you can totally make it happen with a J.
That's really great advice. And just even that mention of asking for help, right? You can only read and know so much, and you can ask questions, but having help from an immigration lawyer, like you said, is sounds like that is probably a good idea, especially if you're making these long-term commitments, right?
Exactly. Also, because remember that
meet all that criteria.
Yeah, totally. Because no, for immigration, like I'm gonna joke that I'm an expert. Obviously, I'm not an expert, but I've had to go through so much. I became a citizen like 2 months ago, finally. But sometimes, thank you. But sometimes they give you, you know, like even if you pay for the consulting hour, is worth it because it is so complicated that just remember sometimes there's steps that you make that if you make, they might harm your opportunities to apply for something else, and then you can't take that back. So that's why it's very, very important that before making any big decision like that, you know, you just make sure that you know what you're doing so that you don't step on your own feet. That's all I've got. But I don't want to take any more of your time. Obviously, if
no. Thank you so much.
Questions, I'm happy to answer. I'm gonna write my email here in the chat. If anybody wants to reach out, I'm happy to help. If I don't respond, bear with me and try again later. Sometimes I'm overwhelmed and I forget with email, like probably so many of us. But there we go.
Yeah, and especially with your transition, right? You're taking a test, right? You got to take a test. You have to graduate. I'm going to stress her out right now.
I have to take 2 tests.
And you have to move to New York with a baby
I know.
that's going to have changing sleep schedules.
It's great.
Is your husband, your husband's an attending though, right? So what are you guys doing for that?
He's staying.
He's going to stay.
So yeah, so do you remember how I told you guys that my parents were still bending over backwards to make this happen? They're gonna be, you know, they're gonna come and help while we figure out what to do. There's options. You have to figure it out. Like I know you can get an au pair, you can get a nanny, but you know, my parents are taking some time. They're coming to help. My mom spent 6 months with me when the baby was born here, even though my poor dad was alone in Colombia. So yeah, parents are always helpful, but my husband's staying here. I'm going with the baby. He's commuting over weekends, but it's just one 1 year, and then we'll see where life takes us. As you guys know, yeah, just as an update, I'm doing craniofacial surgery at NYU, so I'm very excited, and I hope after that, you know, that I can get a job. Like I was telling you, everybody always tells you that the next step is going to be hard. So even 2 months ago on interviews, people were like, well, what are you going to do? It's so hard to get a job. You're not going to get a job. You're going to get, guess what? It never stops. So at some point you just have to stop listening, and it's like, I'll find my way. You know, and my family, like my husband, has been incredibly generous and just, you know, and kind in allowing this. I think from the time he met me, he knew that I came to this country with a purpose and a reason, and I appreciate that he honors that. But, you know, sometimes, yeah, it takes some sacrifices that to people outside of medicine and surgery seem crazy, but I think that, you know, we'll enjoy the year in New York City.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. You have many new fans, so thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your email. Thank you for everybody for attending. Thank you, Isabel, for setting this up and coordinating everything per usual. And I think we're gonna have this, and that's another thing, Liliana, is we put this on YouTube. So if somebody asks me a question, they're like they approach us and is like,
that's
hey,
great.
I am IMG. I just sent them the video, right? I'm like, take a look at this.
That's awesome.
Story. And so we're hoping to generate this library of resources. So thank you so much.
I love it. Of course. Thank you again so much for inviting me. Yeah, I'm honored, and let me know if anything else that I can help with in the future, but it's great to be part of this society. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Good luck to everybody.
Thank you.
Of course. Have a good night. Bye.